For me, the core of storytelling is that you're sitting with people. You can look at them in their eyes. You can watch their responses, and you can, as I often do, you can play little tricks on them. So you surprise them and they all go, ooh, and that's the sort. It's that interaction with a live audience.
The narratives we tell ourselves are how we define ourselves. If we're telling ourselves stories about our local place and our local environment and the people who once were there and how they lived, again, we've built more of a sense of community. And that sense of the past and where we are now is the real essence of where our future is.
Storytelling is the most democratic of arts. It's the most human of arts. It makes us who we are. While oral tradition went into a wane for a while, for the last 30 years it's been on the growth.
Not long ago, me and some of the family went up to the Glens of Antrim. If you go up the coast past Carnlough out towards Waterfoot, there is a place there called Ardclinnis. There's an old ruined church there, but there is also a fairy tree. Some people call it fairy tree, some people call it a raggedy tree, because a lot of people come along and tie up bits of material. We went up to the fairy tree. There was a particular young woman there. I said, when you go in here, you have to treat the tree with respect. There's a process that you have to do. It's very, very simple, but if you don't do it, there'll be a problem, because the fairies need to have respect. I walked in and I walked around the tree in the right way and thanked the tree and thanked the fairies. This particular young woman came in and just walked past it and walked over to this other place and was looking around and had no respect for the tree. Then she sat on this wall, and the next thing was her phone goes falling off the wall on the far side of the wall where all these weeds were, nettles and things like that. She tried to reach it and she almost fell off the wall and had to be pulled back. I just looked at her and said, if you'd have just been grateful to the tree and just done the wee thank you to the tree, that wouldn't have happened. Now, I would not say that it was the cause of the problem, but it did seem very strange that nobody else fell off the wall.
My mother was from Rathlin Island, and she was full of stories when we were children about fairies and the wee folk and various places in Rathlin. I like local history, and I like going into the landscape where you see the echoes of that history. Now, if there's a story connected to that, it brings it alive.
Probably my earliest memory of folklore is my big brother. I'm the youngest of 5. My big brother was in the Air Force when I was born, and he told a story about walking home one night after leaving a girl home, and he heard a wailing sound. He saw this white thing going from tree to tree, and he was convinced and said it was a banshee, predicting a death, of course. So he started stripping off his overcoat, his jacket, and apparently he ran into the house with his eyes staring in his head and told my mother, who was English, that he'd heard a banshee. She knew nothing about banshees. But the interesting thing was, he believed in that till the day he died. That terrified me, scared the life out of me. But it gave me a lifelong interest in folklore. And then when I became a librarian, I'd be telling stories to children. Then I started oral storytelling, just telling stories without books. And the rest is history. I've been doing it for 50 years now.
My father was a shamaki. That's an Irish word some people think it just means storyteller. It means a lot more than that. He was a storyteller, yes, but he was a great singer, a performer. He was also what was known as a tradition holder. He would pass on information about what happened in the past, not just about Ireland, but about so many other things. He was not an educated man, but he knew so much. However, I learned over years that I had a voice, and that's one of the most important things. If you're going to tell stories, you have to find your own voice. It took a long time, but I found it. That doesn't mean to say I'm a great storyteller, it's just I love telling stories.
If you go a few miles down the road, you'll come to the village of Cushindun. There's a great story there about an old woman who was sitting by the river, a tiny old woman, washing even tinier shirts. And a young girl came along and she saw the old woman. She said, "What are you doing?" And the old woman said, "These are the war shirts of the fairies from this glen. There's a big battle over in Scotland tomorrow, and I have to get the shirts ready." And the girl said, "But if the battle's in Scotland, how will I know who won?" And the lady said, "Come down here tomorrow, around this time. If the river is clear, we'll have won. But if the river is stained brown in colour, it'll be stained with our blood, and you'll know we lost." So the girl waited and waited, and the next day she went down, and there she saw the river rushing and tumbling brown in colour. And ever since then there've been no fairies in that glen, and the name of the glen is Glen Dun. The river's called the River Dun, which of course means Glen Dun's the Brown Glen. Cushindun is the foot of the Brown River. And if you go down to Cushindun, walk along beside the river there, this lovely river path, you'll see the Brown River. And that's how the village gets its name.
This would have been a Benedictine monastery, and there would have been nuns in it up until the 15th century. And when Henry VIII decided to dissolve the monasteries, this closed and it was abandoned. In here was the tomb of the Earls of Antrim. So one of the big chieftains in Northampton was Sorley Boy MacDonald. They eventually became part of the establishment, and this was their burial place. This here was open. It was just a caged door up until the 1980s, and in 1984 it was broken into. And we were only children at the time, and we came down with torches and all the rest to see inside it. And inside there was 7 or 8 coffins, and they were lead lined and they were rotten, but there were bones and skulls and arms sticking out and rib cages, and it was absolutely, it was a horror film. And at the back of it there was a skull on top of a wooden or a stone plinth, and it had all this ginger hair coming out of it. I always wondered why old buildings could attract curiosity and a sense of you needed to know something about them, and I always felt this building had something you needed to know about it. And when I was told that story, it kind of made sense of why it was left like this and why it would attract curiosity or questions. That a building could have its own resonance and echo through the years, and if you were open enough, you would pick up on it. The landscape's littered with places like this that are just waiting for a story to be told about them. And it's a history that would exist in an oral tradition that wouldn't have been written down because it's not important, but yet it has its own mark on the landscape and in the psyche at some level.
Particularly in Irish stories, sense of place is very important. We can bring you to the places where these things happen. We can bring you to old houses, cottages, mountains, rivers. So it's essential to Irish storytelling.
Learning the stories, the old stories, the mythologies, and also some of the folklore about the way people lived, whether it was in an urban setting or in a rural setting, they had a huge influence on me all my life. It's this thing about having respect for the old traditions, the old ways. And people might say that's just silly. However, I don't agree with that, so I'll just do it, keep on doing it.
I think storytelling appeals to all age groups of people, from preschool children to people I work with, very old people. It crosses the barriers of ability and disability. Storytelling is something that everybody does naturally. You only have to get on a bus in Belfast and sit down. The stories are there. I go around the world, I've been to 5 continents telling stories. And people love Irish stories all over the world.
Why do you think particularly Irish stories?
Because they're the best.
Yeah.
I've thought about what folk tales are about, and you have the story. And a good folk tale, it isn't the literal story that you're being told that matters. It's the underlying emotion that's in that. You're being passed on an emotional language rather than a literal language. You were being taught a life lesson in that story. That when you went out into life, if you came across a situation again, you would feel what was going on there rather than think it. And that's what the essence of a story was about. You think in stories like Little Red Riding Hood, very traditional, popular stories, and they carry a message that's still relevant today. And I think folk tradition and folklore was to do that as well.
Old road shit about away. Shit about a Berlin where the beer grog to being within our movie draw is yellow murlock. Chill the lace no gullive. Old road shit about away. Old road shit about away. Old road shit about away. Annie sure hopped and tardy, the granuil, the chapter salia, ugly armalay margarda, gilid hin, nigalnus bonny, as courage you rigger gull